would you say that it probably helped you have a fuller perspective on the need to understand, in the sales capacity? I think a lot of salespeople are great. They're great at telling things, but they're not as curious or as they don't put on their investigative reporter hat enough and often speak first before understanding. I would imagine being the BDR helps you probably have a good foundation in that regard.
Absolutely. It's, as almost everybody who's worked the role knows, it can be a grind, it can be thankless, but it hones your skill for fact finding and really understanding, like learning the discipline that your customer's problem is just 1,000 times more important than anything that you have to sell is something that, it's worth its weight in gold, certainly.
Where you see the evolution of the sales role, and did it start with anybody implementing ways to automate that feedback loop, or was that sort of the beginnings of it, or was it more just based on pure outreach?
Talking points and questions that they needed answers from them, and we would get those and we would bring it in. And so it, like anything, I think the relationship took a while to find its footing to the extent that at least, developing it to the robustness that we eventually got to. But yeah, they were absolutely a partner. It was positive friction, if anything.
Hi, this is Ed Kerr, and welcome to the Sales Elevation Podcast. I've got Eric Blum, VP of Sales for ServiceChannel, as my guest today. Eric, how are you, man?
I'm great, Ed. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We had a really interesting conversation last week and want to sort of just continue along those lines. But could you start by maybe just giving me a little bit of a background, sharing with our audience, a little bit of background in your sales career, and then what you're doing at ServiceChannel, the size of your team, and it'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So worn I guess a couple of different hats at ServiceChannel. Actually started as a BDR. That was my transition into the world of tech. I've been there for 6 years, and I am fortunate enough to be in the position I am now, which is the VP over North America. So my team is about 32 people, I think, right now. I have the functions of sales engineering and all of new logo sales under me.
Great. So from BDR to VP of sales, that's an awesome, growth track you've taken. Probably a great way to start out, I would imagine, in terms of understanding the business itself and the company and your customers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have traded that time. I had the great fortune of a fantastic mentor in my original CRO when I stepped into that role. And to be honest, he was the one that convinced me to take something that at the time I was a little arrogant and I thought that maybe that wasn't where I belonged. It turns out it was. It taught me everything that I really hold dear now in terms of just like how to, discipline oneself around one's time. And yeah, I mean, it taught me lessons in 6 months to a year that I probably wouldn't have learned in an MBA. So
yeah. Would you say that it probably helped you have a fuller perspective on the need to understand, in the sales capacity? I think a lot of salespeople are great. They're great at telling things, but they're not as curious or as they don't put on their investigative reporter hat enough and often speak first before understanding. I would imagine being the BDR helps you probably have a good foundation in that regard.
Absolutely. It's, as almost everybody who's worked the role knows, it can be a grind, it can be thankless, but it hones your skill for fact finding and really understanding, like learning the discipline that your customer's problem is just 1,000 times more important than anything that you have to sell is something that, it's worth its weight in gold, certainly.
And I found over the years that a lot of even seasoned salespeople still have a hard time grasping that, which is kind of shocking to me, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for, the more your product knowledge can be a scourge on your ability to run really excellent, truly excellent discovery if you let it, right? That knowledge, the in-depth knowledge of what a product can do. I've seen it time and time again, just, reps are chomping at the bit to solve a problem. Like they have the best interest of the customer at heart, but interjecting what you believe is what the customer wants to hear at the wrong moment of time certainly, backfires to what it is you're setting out to attempt to achieve when you're talking to customers.
That old cliche of you're selling them a banana, but they really just want a hammer, right? So
that's it.
One of the things we talked about earlier, which I'd love to dig into, ultimately, I would love to explore kind of your thoughts around the future of the sales role.
Sure.
And how it's evolving, how you're seeing it evolve with your team, and more specifically, how AI is a big part of that. And then how that translates to proper preparation and relevance of conducting communications on the front lines of sales. But before we get into that, you mentioned before that when you first started off in this role, you had to kind of seek or prove out product market fit in an area where ServiceChannel hadn't really fully flushed out that opportunity yet. And I'd kind of love to learn a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So taking a step back, I mean, what ServiceChannel is and what it was born from was addressing the need of facilities managers primarily, to deal with work order operations. So workflow automation from, something's broken to something's fixed. Right. And it was tailored. It's a relatively robust product. It was certainly originally designed to be much more friendly to the enterprise, I'd say. And so just, giving context to what the challenge was maybe, 3-4 years ago, this is before, as the company was scaling up to, from probably 50 million ARR to 100 or so, we obviously needed to expand the addressable market and in order to accomplish those goals. And so what we had to find was a way to appeal to a mid-market that had been relatively untouched, right? And so, yeah, what that looked like was a lot of, as you say, sort of like experimental sales, right? Like a growth mindset on the team where, one half of their job was getting deals closed and the other half of their job was conducting those, asking the questions interwoven, I guess, into the discovery documentation that would enable really quick product iteration and solid feedback to product to marketing on, what it is the market actually was asking for, what it needed. And we ended up designing quite a few novel product types that took off quickly and enabled us to scale. And eventually we had a great exit to Fortive, and we currently are still under that umbrella.
That's awesome. And I think that you've done that. You did that successfully in proving out that first channel, if you will, but there's always ongoing, right? I know you've mentioned before how critical it is that there's a really effective, efficient, and clear feedback loop between sales and product and marketing. And when you did that first effort, you obviously your people were simultaneously selling, but while they were out there fact finding and being sort of sales engineers, did you have a process that you implemented for them? Did you have a series of questions that they were all trained on? I mean, how did you implement that so that everybody was kind of aligned and on board?
That's a great question. So yeah, specifically, and you and I, I think we talked about this a little bit, but it's really a couple of things, right? So yeah, we defined what discovery looked like, not only, like I said, not only from the standpoint of understanding the pain of the customer as it related to what we could offer, but also very much like the pain of the customer as it related to what we could not, right? And so in some ways that I think I have one of the points of pride of my career is that the sellers that ran through that team, I think, just became incredible artists at discovery, right? And it was because of, maybe somewhat serendipitously, they were on this fact-finding mission essentially for the basis of product, right? Or for the benefit of product. And what happens is you are just focused on the customer's problem, right? And what that enabled us to do was figure out how we needed, it turns out it mostly had to do with packaging constraints that we had put around ourselves, right? And so once we, I think, dispensed with the notion that we knew how to package our product and sell our product, and we let the market dictate that in the new segment, the wheels kind of came on the car, so to speak, and we were off to the races. And that's obviously an oversimplification of how many iterations we had to go through. But I think, yeah, so one thing is like the discovery documentation, just standardizing the questions that were asked, very specific questions that were asked, while also, not constraining the creativity or autonomy of the AEs, and culturally manifesting like a culture of really kind of entrepreneurship, right? So one of the things, again, the effort on that team was exceptionally high during the time that we were scaling this up. And I attribute that to just, it was a startup within the company. And that was very much the mindset. And I think that actually that lesson is something that I would always take to every spot I ever went, for a turnaround, for a scale up, right? For a startup itself. Like, you have to feel like you're part of a special mission. And the minute that salespeople feel that way, I think a lot of things happen, not the least of which is they start functioning as a genuine team, and they start having genuine appreciation and, I guess, happiness for one another in the continued success, because they know in that environment, success will beget success.
Yeah, that's great. I would think that motion, that behavior, that process would be invaluable for every sales team at any level of maturity, right? It's just table stakes. You've got to be able to be hyper focused on the customer pain and, whether your product or solution aligns successfully with it. So are you, when your team would come back with
Mhm.
various amounts of feedback, what was the process to kind of categorize it or gain consensus around it and then share it with product?
Yeah. So we had, in the beginning, it was quite rudimentary, but the way, so I like to think of myself, although I'm sure that many other technical people in my organization would disagree, but I think of myself as sort of like a multidisciplinarian, right? And so one of my passions is, I guess, like data structuring, and how do you take really like disparate data points and make them meaningful, right, and transferable to an organization like your product organization. And so in the beginning, sort of our rudimentary process was we would meet twice a week. I still do this to this day for different reasons, but Monday, Friday, right? And Monday's the mission day, and Friday's the accountability and consensus day.
Yep.
And the point of that is to really, like, to the best of your ability, quantify the qualitative information. And it just so happens that salespeople are excellent at that, right? So this is, I guess, the silver bullet in my mind is that you have people who are hyper in tune to like semantic nuance, and that's what they've cut their teeth on. It's how they've made their career, right? They understand what the customer is saying, sometimes better than the customer understands what the customer is saying. And making them understand that's their superpower is part of developing this culture where they can give you the readout on that Friday, right? So, hey guys, like, head into the field today. There's 19 meetings, right, that we're going to conduct. And in those 19 meetings, we need to be hyper focused on identifying whether customers are leaning this way, right? Set up 3 A/B tests and just run them, and then be intentional, right? And have high accountability around getting that input from them. And then, again, it probably sounds like a pretty low tech way, and to some certain degree it is, and things have certainly improved in the way you could do this now, which is something we're about to get into. But, just even that documentation, it sent to the hands of product and marketing is, I'm willing to bet, 10 times as valuable in whatever they could achieve just trying to scrape things together.
Yep. Yeah, it's, product so often just kind of flies blind. Obviously they do lots of testing, but at the same times, there's often a blind spot and assumptions, that often have to be made either just to maintain a certain pace to market. But how receptive were they to some of the feedback? Were they often, super glad to have it and reacted to it and implemented it, or was there defensiveness or pushback?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Like, the honest answer is it's always going to be a mixed bag, because product people make their hay by having, at least in my experience, super strong opinions about what's good and what's bad. And they should, right? Like, that's their prerogative. It's what they're trained to do. And I think that they are oftentimes right. But I had the great fortune of my team very in tune, right? We could talk about another probably topic for an entire podcast is incentive alignment, right? But thankfully we were aligned in terms of incentives through the scale up. And so they had every reason to open this market, and we had every reason to open the market, and we were highly collaborative, and we got talking points and questions that they needed answers from them, and we would get those and we would bring it in. And so it, like anything, I think the relationship took a while to find its footing, to the extent that at least, you know, developing it to the robustness that we eventually got to. But yeah, they were absolutely a partner. It was positive friction, if anything.
That's great. And that process, having gone through that process and continuing part of that process still today, what has it kind of, what have you seen with your new salespeople? And I think you mentioned on a previous conversation we had about a lot of your newer salespeople are actually a little bit more adept at some of these AI tools and ways to leverage AI to actually get up to a performance level of some of your senior people who have yet to sort of avail themselves of those tools, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
So
talk to me about that. Where you see the evolution of the sales role, and did it start with anybody implementing ways to automate that feedback loop, or was that sort of the beginnings of it, or was it more just based on pure outreach?
yeah, I mean, so there's definitely an array of, I guess, like general AI adoption across my team and obviously across the industry at large. And I would say that as you would expect, right? There's people of varying degrees of success. There's also people that have just started their career, right? And are planning for a 40-year timeline. There's people who are closer to the end of their career, and, you know, is the investment into deep understanding of Gen AI or agentic building and structuring and layering these processes into their day to day, is it worth the return? Right. And I don't know that's necessarily the motivation. I think it probably the explanation is probably far more simple, which is just that they know what they do works and it's continuing to work despite the fact that they may not have a high propensity for adoption of the new tech. But what I would say is, I'll say two things. So my view, and what I continuously say to my more junior sellers, right, is that, you know, my belief is that the role of sales, much like the role of almost everything else in knowledge work, is going to take on, I guess, what it will look like in the future to us sitting here, right? To us in the future, it'll be normal. From our perspective today, I think what we would see is just kind of a relatively homogenous group of AI generalists with specific characteristics, like the sales AI generalist, right? And you can see the product AI generalist. And what is that? It's a shared knowledge base with different tooling and different human skills that enable, I guess, optimal use of these pretty advanced toolkits that they have to reach specific outcomes, right? I think, and to some extent, I think that, getting back to just communication for a second, hopefully that improves the shared context that we all have with one another and the communication that we have. I think the reality is that as output skyrockets, right, as each person is theoretically capable of 10x what they're doing today, that's also 10x context sharing that would need to also be conducted in order to affect real change and promote outcomes within businesses. And as far as I see today, no one is solving for that, right? So that, I think, is probably like this year, next year, that arena, people are going to start cracking that open, but lost the thread a little bit. But I think getting back to like, make this a little bit more like based and tactical. What I had a conversation with one of my junior sellers today, actually, right? And my advice to them was to, as far as our tech stack and their roles and responsibilities would allow them, right, without hurting themselves, they should think about everything first as a, you know, somewhat cliche, but can I do this with AI? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like, you know, just keep asking ChatGPT what you should do, or, you know, these sort of like low level use cases that everybody finds today. But like, why, for example, are you inputting information into a slide deck for one of your strategic accounts, right? Like, why are you making the deal deck I asked you for? Well, you're doing it because I told you to do it. But what you should say to me, what I want you to say to me is like, wouldn't it be better if I built a co-pilot agent or a custom GPT, right, that has all of this information as well? And you could query if you had a question about where I am with my prospecting effort or the deal effort. right? And again, eventually someone's going to need to tie all of this together. Unfortunately, in transitionary states like we're in right now, right, where there's legacy technology and emerging technology, sometimes you're going to have to do duplicate work if you want to learn the new thing, because the company that you work for requires the legacy version, right? But I'm just trying to make sure that I think the newer generation of sellers understands what it is they could actually build themselves. And because the role in 10 years will require all of this stuff. I mean, and it's probably much sooner than that, right? But I know in 10 years, it's going to require it.
100%. And I think as we get, kind of make our way through this transition, we're already in a position where the AI can give you so much information and insight into any situation, any customer, their pain, give you more insights into what better questions to ask, you name it, right? And whether you rely on your CMS or your CRM for that, or whether you rely on an AI agent who's scouring the web and doing, the BDR work for you, there's still a lot for the average human being to just sort of ingest and to process and to put to use, right? And,
Right.
we humans evolve at our same pace. We're not at
Yeah,
that level yet.
that's exactly right.
And so one of the things I thought was really interesting, you had a post on LinkedIn where you mentioned that communication skills are going to become more and more important because we have the ability to tap into this vast amount of information, all the information in the world.
Right.
But somebody has to be a translator of that. And somebody has to decide, assuming it can be distilled effectively, I still need to be able to understand it, communicate with a level of expertise around specifically that distilled piece of intelligence, right?
So yeah, if I may. So like in the world of just expounding on the value of communication, right? And it's like, I think for what it's worth, like 10 years ago, I read this prognostication of Mark Cuban's, right? That was just like, the only thing that matters is that you learn social skills because computers will do everything else. Right. And, which is profound given that it was a decade ago. Right. And kind of set off the cuff. But the point is that I think I envision a world where an AE is waking up to their personal assistant agent telling them that the other agents scouring for those signals have, loaded 5 to 10 that they need to perform that morning. And those things are on the calendar, and it's time to like reach out to the customer with messaging along these lines, right? So that future is not terribly far off. And when that happens, right, who is going to, if everybody has access to that, who wins, right? Who wins the deal? It's just simply going to be in a somewhat ironic way, right? It's going to be the people who are awesome at developing relationships, who are really excellent at understanding their customer's pain and how the signal they're getting relates to that pain, right? Because ultimately what do you become is you become, the semantic and empathetic layer, the go-between between pure knowledge and your customer's situation, right? So the better you understand that, the more effective you're going to be. It's been a truth for a while. I think it will just simply be, exponentially more true in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I had an interesting conversation with a mentor of mine recently who's been in sales his whole career. And he was referencing another book or another paper where someone basically compared the salesperson to really kind of a container, almost like a therapist, where you've earned that trust and you're gathering as much information. You're attuned enough to the cues that they're giving to understand what they're not telling you and hopefully get it out of them or infer what's being said. And you're really this trust center that they can drop all their pain into, and they're willing to share that with you so that you can actually deliver really the type of solution that's going to be appropriate. And that on a human to human level, there's something there which is all about rapport building, trust building, human to human, connection, but it falls short if it's not informed. If I go in with the wrong research about their pain or the wrong questions to ask, I'll miss the mark. And I think in that future state you talk about, I think there was a great example, and I could so see that being something, really right around the corner. Not only would it be that those insights into those 5 appointments that have already been set for you by your assistant to their assistant, it's 20 minutes on the calendar and both parties know exactly these are the three things we're going to talk about. And
Exactly.
it's going to be super efficient. And then, yeah, what is going to drive that decision if they're talking to 3, 4, or 5 other vendors, right? It might actually come down
Right.
like Cuban says, like they better like you.
That's it.
I
I
mean,
mean, yeah, it's about, yeah, I think it's about genuine empathy, business empathy, personal empathy, right? And just understanding that that's the barrier. And it's, if there's one thing out of all of the capabilities of artificial intelligence, right? The capability that I believe has the longest horizon is effective reasoning, right? The notion that they could somehow understand or simulate human empathy. It's what makes us, right? It's
Yep.
going to be the last domino to fall. And and we're social animals. Salespeople will be all right, but they do have to learn all this. They have to learn all this tooling super fast. That's the only thing I'll say.
Yeah, the tooling and the proper context for it, and the critical thinking, like you say, we're just, I might get a ton of information, but if I can't synthesize that and apply it appropriately, then no matter how empathetic I am, I still haven't leveraged that tool effectively. And that language between the synthesis of the greatest amount of information and its place with the customers is where everyone's going to begin to get more and
Right.
more specialized and capable, I think.
Yeah. No, I think so as well.
Well, hey man, this has been a great conversation, but I want to, before we wrap up, given everything we've discussed about this has been a great conversation, what would be a piece of advice that you might give to somebody who's currently a BDR or in some other
Mhm.
role within a sales organization and they want to get to your role in 5 years and or 10 years and where would you tell them, especially given what we've just discussed, how would you advise them on that path and what to perhaps focus on? Because I'm sure a lot of young people are kind of wondering, where's this heading? What does a leader of 5 or 10 years from now look like? What sort of things
Yeah.
never go away, you know?
So I think that the best advice that I could possibly give, it is exactly in the same line. First of all, you got to execute, but that's just table stakes, right? So everybody needs that. That gives you the leverage that you need to ask the questions that you should be asking. And the questions you should be asking are questions that help you understand what your boss and your boss's boss care about, how they're measured, what they think about, what keeps them up, right? Which is exactly all you're doing is an extension of what you're already good at, right? You just need to reframe it and recontextualize it to, the fastest risers are going to be the people that are best at managing up. How do you manage up? You understand what up even does, right? And what they care about. And so I would say, if you want the job, if you want your boss's job, then the first thing that you need to do is deeply understand what that job involves. And, 9 times out of 10, but the only other thing that I would say is that 9 times out of 10, I think a lot of people underestimate how much those people in those positions deeply care and research their own roles, right? Like, I don't know any VPs of sales that don't listen a wild amount of podcasts and read things. Right? So I think the getting into the habits of ingesting materials, and they don't necessarily even, like I said before, multidisciplinary, and you can make yourself better by going more broadly as well. The more you understand about marketing and product, right? And leading people from the C-suite, the better you're going to be at your job, even if you're a BDR.
That's great advice. It really is. And I think probably a lot of younger people or more junior people don't take the time to put themselves in their boss's seat. And, everything ultimately, it leads to what are the results? What's our mission and how do we measure it? And what are the results? The results that every salesperson is measured by, obviously, is how many new accounts are they bringing in? What's that number, that quota? And it's if you're not aligned with that, you're certainly, and that's just one aspect of it, obviously, but that's great advice. Well, Eric, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to do it again sometime.
Thanks, Ed.
All right.
Appreciate you
Thanks,
having me
bud.
on.
So
Take care.
long.